I've had the Win 4 for a little while now, and at first I was really excited to tell everybody why I think this is the best handheld PC you can get and why it's awesome. But then we already kind of reviewed it, and then GPD went ahead and announced that there's going to be a new version, a more powerful version. So I was kind of left thinking, what do I do now? But after spending a few days thinking about that, I realized this is still an awesome handheld, and I still think you should consider it if you're in the market for a handheld PC. So let's go take a look at it and see if this is something you should pick up. For the CPU, we have the AMD 6800U, GPU AMD Radeon 680, RAM goes up to 32GB of LPDDR5 RAM, we have USB 4 support, the screen is a 6-inch IPS touchscreen, we have Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.0, a 46.6 watt-hour battery, and you can get it for $699 using the code in the description. So let's talk about the device and how it's built, and as far as the build quality goes, this is a premium device all the way. There is definitely no doubt when you're holding this that you have an expensive piece of tech in your hands. And really, GPD has done an amazing job putting this together with how much power there is for that small size. I mean, look at it next to the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is just huge next to this thing. And now let's start breaking it down by each component, starting off with the D-pad, and they did a really good job with this D-pad. Now, off the bat, you would think this is just your standard Vita D-pad, but this actually feels a little bit different. It's tighter, it has less travel, but it's still a really good D-pad. It just doesn't feel like the Vita one did. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, it's just a different D-pad. Underneath that, we have our fingerprint scanner. Below that, we have one of our two front-facing speakers, and right next to that, we have our select button. On the side, we also have this little switch here that lets us go from gamepad to mouse mode, and on top of that, we have our SD card slot. Coming back to the front of the device, we have our left analog stick, and this is a good stick. I like it. It's just a little bit smaller than what I got used to in these Windows handhelds. It's, I would say, a little bit bigger than a Switch stick. It definitely sticks out more. Overall, it's a solid stick. No real complaints. It's just the texture feels a little bit different than what you would be expecting with the stick this size. On the other side, we have our 4 face buttons, and again, these are going to be very similar to the Vita. I would say, just like the D-pad, a little bit tighter. And if you see right here, you can actually see the PlayStation Legends, which is a nice little touch. Good attention to detail. Right below that, we have our right stick, and underneath that, we have our optical mouse sensor. And while this isn't, in my opinion, as good as a trackpad, I would say this is a close second, because it still lets you keep the form factor smaller, but it gives you all the functionality of a mouse. Underneath that, we have our start button, our speaker, and right below that, a menu button. On the side, we just have a reset pinhole, and that's about it. Not much to talk about on this side. So moving on the bottom, we have our USB-C port, and right next to that, we have this little lip here, which I'm assuming is for the official dock, which I don't have, so don't really have a use for that. But if you do, I'm sure it'll keep it nice and steady. Now moving on to the back, we have these two mappable back buttons over here, which you can actually set in software for different functions. And in between those, we have this fairly large intake vent, which is good to see because you do want to make sure this thing stays cool. On top, we have the exhaust port, and also pretty good size. On top of that, we have our headphone jack, a full USB-A 3.0 port, and right next to that, we have our USB 4 port, which if you want to connect an eGPU to it, this is where you would do it. Next to that, we have our volume plus and minus buttons, and they're flipped, which might be where Powkitty got the idea from. I don't know. Not crazy about him, but it's really not a big deal. You get used to it. And next to that, we have our power button. Moving on a little bit further to the left, we have our shoulder buttons, and on this model, I have the darker L1, R1 buttons, which I prefer. I'm not really too crazy about RGB, so it doesn't really bother me that I can't really see the lights, but if you are somebody that likes those, maybe look for the clearer ones. And the feel on these is going to be like a soft mouse click, not very loud, but you definitely feel the press. And right below that we have our analog triggers, and these are going to be smaller than what you would find on something like the Steam Deck or the INEO Geek or basically any other Windows handheld. But they're pretty easy to use and you have a good amount of pressure on them, which means you're going to be able to get the right inputs. Over here on the back, we have this nice little texture grip to it, which makes it easier to hold. And overall, I would say the Win 4 is a pleasure to play on. It fits great in the hand. It's heftier than you would imagine, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And honestly, you get used to that pretty fast. After a couple minutes of playing it, the weight just feels normal. I can easily say the Win 4 is one of the best well-built devices I've ever played with. It just feels premium and it feels good to play with. And that's not something that's easy to find outside of the big first-party manufacturers. As far as the experience of actually using it, this is going to feel more like a mini PC versus a handheld PC. And I know that sounds kind of weird because technically this is a handheld PC, but because of the way you interact with it and the options you have, it's going to feel more like having a tiny laptop with really good controllers on it. And that's a good thing. That's not taking anything away from it. Now that being said, there are still things here that make the gaming experience a lot easier, to where it does still have those commodities of a handheld that we're kind of getting used to. But unlike with the Steam Deck and the Geek, you don't just have a button to bring out those options. You do have to open something called Motion Assist. But once you do that, you're going to have access to all the things that we gotten used to out of handheld PCs like TDP and custom fan curves and all that good stuff. Actually, I guess mostly that's mostly what you're going to be adjusting. But anyway, let's say you're in a game and you want to go ahead and adjust things on the fly. Well, all you do is swipe up on the bottom right and that's going to take you right back into the desktop, and from there you can just tap Motion Assist and adjust the TDPs according to what you needed for that specific game. Sure, this isn't as elegant as you have it in other systems where you can just press a button and do it right there, but it's still fairly easy to do, and there are some other options that the community's already done to be able to have that panel show up. I just found that this really wasn't that big of a deal, so I just kind of stuck with it. And that's kind of been my experience with the Win 4. I know there's options that I can tweak and adjust, but I really haven't found that I need to. Actually, no, there is one thing I adjusted, and that's the fan curves. I did set custom fan curves because I felt like it was running a little louder than I liked it to. But if you did want to customize those back buttons, all you have to do is go into Win Controls, and that's going to bring you here. Here you can set the back buttons, or you can also adjust the mouse, RGB lights, all that good stuff. It's pretty easy to access it, but again, I don't even see the RGB lights on this thing, and I found that everything was working just fine out of the box, so I haven't really messed with any of that. Now, one feature that I feel we forget about all the time is that this is a full-on PC, so you're going to be able to do anything you would do on a laptop or desktop on this handheld, and all you would really need is a little dock like what I have here with this Unitek dock. Now on the back it has some extra ports for like USB 3.0, Ethernet, power source, all of that. So all you would really need to do is set this up and then have it plugged into a monitor, have your keyboard ready, your mouse ready, and whenever you actually need to sit down and do some actual work on it, it would be ready to go as your full desktop. And this is going to be a perfect solution if you just need to do some lighter PC work, maybe some light video editing, things like that. If you're just kind of your average PC user and you want a good gaming experience, you're going to be set with something like this. Now, if you need something more powerful, then maybe consider putting together a full desktop and not going for a handheld. But if this is something that you kind of already set your mind to, just know that, hey, it will work. The cooling system in here is going to be good enough for all of that prolonged work. But because this is battery powered, I would say maybe don't leave it plugged in all the time. We're not really sure what the effects of that is going to be long term. So just whenever you're not going to be doing any desk work, make sure to take that off. But one of the other benefits of being able to dock this is that you can run at the highest TDPs, and because you're going to be running off wall power, you don't really have to worry about the battery drain. So you could actually push these with more demanding games and get higher resolutions. This screen does go up to 1080p. In handheld mode, I would say probably play mostly in 720p, but docked, why not push it? See what kind of performance you get out of it. So I talked about the emulation capabilities of the 6800U when I reviewed the Loki, and if you haven't seen that video, you probably should, because I worked really hard on it, and I mean, it's a good video, so yeah, you should go watch that. But after this video, right now we're on the Win 4. The Loki can wait. Let's keep talking about the Win 4. And the emulation capabilities of this thing are amazing. There really isn't many games that you're not going to be able to play, and not just emulation wise, but even modern games, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. Basically, if there's an emulator for whatever system you want to play out there, chances are you're going to be able to run it here. And to think that you can do that much in something this compact is pretty amazing. For this video, I'm keeping it pretty short and sweet. I'm only going to show one game from a selection of systems, mostly just GameCube, PS2, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3, because that'll give you a pretty good idea of the capabilities of this system. And there are going to be some games from those higher end systems like 360 and PS3 that aren't going to work, and that's mostly going to come down to compatibility with the emulator, not so much because of a lack of power. Sure, there are some exceptions to that, something like God of War 3, then chances are you're not going to be able to hit a full 60 on that, but you can lock it to 30 and have a pretty decent experience playing that game that way. Now keep in mind, this is a handheld, so it's a smaller device. It's not like a full-on desktop PC that can just brute force its way through pretty much anything you throw at it if the components are powerful enough. On this one, you do have to take into consideration that hey, this is something you can take with you, and when you look at it that way, it's pretty amazing that so much of the library is available for something this small. I mean, this is about the size of an AYN Odin, just a little chunkier than that, but still, it's pretty compact, and the fact that it can do so much, it's just, I can't get over that. I feel like I've said it a lot so far, but I just gotta repeat it. It's pretty amazing. Now, another thing is that for most of these games, I really didn't have to do any setup outside of maybe adjusting TDP and a couple tweaks here and there in certain emulators. Like with PlayStation 2, I had to switch from Vulkan to DirectX, and I found that that was working a little bit better. But I feel like if you're into emulation, you understand that there is going to be a certain amount of adjustments that have to go into these. But for the most part, I don't want to sell it short how easy it is to get these things running. For most of them, it was just pick a game and boot it up. Sure, you have to map the controller sometimes, but luckily this maps as an Xbox 360 controller, so it's even easier. And because you have the keyboard and the mouse right there, if you need to exit it, if you need to go to just a couple settings, if you want to use some hotkeys, everything's right there. So if you're used to using a PC, you're gonna feel right at home here. If you're not, it's a pretty easy thing to pick up. And again, having those keys there, being able to get out of full screen into a window mode and accessing the emulator, it's a very nice experience, since you don't have to worry about setting specific keys and worrying about an on-screen keyboard and all that stuff. It's a really good experience once you get used to it. Now I feel, again, if you're looking at this device, then chances are you're already familiar with emulation, you're familiar with how PCs work, because I don't feel like this is going to be a device that somebody that's brand new to gaming is going to be picking up. But even if you were, let's say you're used to using your Switch and you wanted to make the jump over to PC games, well, I think this is probably going to be the more forgiving way of doing that if you don't want to go with something like the Steam Deck, just because of the size. You know, for a lot of people, the size of these larger handhelds is a pretty big turnoff, so having something so compact that's still so well equipped is a pretty solid option, at least in my opinion. But I don't want to keep ranting about how awesome it is to emulate on this. It's just suffice to say that you are going to be able to get a lot of the higher end systems running here, and most games are going to work right off the bat. If you do have some trouble, just go ahead and check out what backend you're using, or maybe adjust the resolution or your TDP. It's usually one of those things, and once you figure that out, you're going to be able to get those games going, no problem. Up next, let's talk about some PC games. And I had this whole thing planned out about what games I wanted to show and what I wanted to do here, but the reality is I don't play a lot of the latest and greatest AAA games, at least not when they first come out. I'm usually somebody that's going to pick them up later on because I always have some giant backlog, or I always end up just playing some other retro game that I remember playing that I really enjoy. There are of course a couple exceptions to that, like if the game has Zelda or Metroid in the name, then yeah, I'm going to be playing that as soon as possible. Or NCAA Football 2024, if we could please get that EAA, that would be really good. But anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent again. So what I decided to do here instead is just refer you to RetroTech.'s video on the 6800U, specifically the Win 4 running the latest AAA games for PC. And performance is solid. I mean, you're going to be getting 30 on some of these games, but you know, some story-driven games running at 30 frames per second isn't the end of the world. I know everybody wants to talk about 60 or above that, say 120 at high settings, but the reality is on a smaller screen or even on a bigger screen, 720 1080p on story-driven games running about 30 frames per second is still a really good time. You don't necessarily need to max everything out. Again, I know some people absolutely have to have that, but if that's you, again, maybe a handheld PC isn't the best option for you. But I'm going to go ahead and have that video linked in the description below, and I'm still going to be showing a couple PC games here, but really Tech Dad makes some awesome videos and he did a really good job covering that with a lot of games that I don't currently have in my library that are going to be more demanding. So if you really want to get a good idea of the capabilities as far as that gaming side of things, go check out this video when you're done here. I mean, I'm pretty sure at this point, if you're subscribed to us, then chances are you're going to be subscribed to his channel too. So it would only make sense, And then when you're done doing that, after you liked his video and potentially share it, come back here and watch more of our videos. So now we get into the final part, and that's to answer the question of, is it worth it? In my opinion, it definitely is, but there are some things you have to consider, and the big one is there is a refresh coming with a more powerful chip. Now, if you're somebody that has to have the latest and greatest and you want the most powerful thing available, then yeah, the 6800U is probably not going to be for you. But if you're somebody that wants something that's going to be very capable, that is a known commodity at this point, that has a good amount of community development behind it and support, then it's definitely a very good option. Especially with this recent price drop to $699 for a 1TB model, that's a really good deal considering the fact that if you were to get a Steam Deck, you're going to be paying about $600 for that 512GB model. And if you were to get an Ally, well, you're going to be paying a similar price, about $600 plus, all things considered. Yes, the Ally is going to be a more powerful system, but there are some issues with the Ally that you might want to consider before jumping on with that one, or just hold on a little bit longer to see if they get resolved. As far as the Win 4, yes, there are some issues here too, but for the most part, they've been taken care of. The decision is ultimately yours, and all I can really do is kind of present to you what I found, and I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions of how I can make them better in the future, please let me know in the comments down below. If you did like the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share the video if you know somebody that might be considering a Win 4, or you just want to get your friends to learn more about this type of things. Really appreciate it, and have a great day.